Friday.
It's Friday. We're on time.
Made it, made
It's
it to
kind of
the week.
unusual for us to be on time.
We are on time, on our time.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, it's getting really in the meat of triathlon season. I got
Yeah.
athletes racing all over the place.
Yeah.
Weather is going up and down, and it's we're kind of really in the heat of it right now.
I think so. And it is neat to see some of the early races happen, and people are sort of getting into it. But right now, and we're right in the beginning of April when we're recording this, the local races are starting to happen, and people really dive into their season.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's such an exciting time, coming off of the off season for sure. So one of the things that is going on in this time is we're building fitness. And a lot of people are building fitness around their heart rate. So John, I know you teach a lot of the physiology of the heart and heart rate. And can you just kind of go through like why we started collecting heart rate and what it actually means physiologically?
Oh, I love it. Well, in my class, or multiple classes, whichever one I'm teaching, I usually do ask the question, why do we measure heart rate? And it's one of these things that we do very commonly now. And sometimes why we do that gets lost. And sometimes the answers are like, well, I measure heart rate to figure out how fast the heart's beating. Okay, yes, that's correct. We are interested in beats per minute. But why do we measure how fast the heart's beating? What does that tell us physiologically? And I'll cut to the chase on this. In essence, heart rate is a proxy for what we really want to know. And what we really want to know is how active our aerobic system is during exercise. And our aerobic system uses oxygen to convert chemical potential energy like glucose, carbohydrates, and fats into mechanical energy. And we want to know how active the aerobic system is because that's the system that we use in endurance sports. If I'm doing something like a sprint event or something, a power event where I'm trying to lift as much as I can, that's a different type of exercise, different type of energy system. Heart rate doesn't become as important when we're doing that type of exercise. But in the endurance world, having a big aerobic engine is key. And the insight to our aerobic engine is rate of oxygen consumption. But to measure that, we need a device that costs anywhere from $5,000 to $70,000. It depends on the level of accuracy, the level of portability, all this type of stuff. And so we don't all have access to that. But what we do have access to is a pulse
Yes.
or a pulse and or some electronic means to measure that pulse. And what's interesting is there's a nice little equation that links rate of oxygen consumption to heart rate, and it's called the Fick equation. And what happens is there in aerobic exercise, steady state exercise, heart rate is an excellent predictor of rate of oxygen consumption. And so, why do we measure heart rate? We measure heart rate to give insight on rate of oxygen consumption, which tells us about the aerobic engine. Now, if we'll get into more later, but that's the
No, it's that's actually really fabulous to kind of have that high level overview. So really what it's telling us, honestly, is like, how much blood we're pumping around and how much oxygen we're pumping around, right? In the simplest.
Oh, no, totally. Yeah. So we breathe the air in to our lungs. The lungs extracts the oxygen, or it goes into the blood, and then the blood gets circulated and takes that oxygen to where it's needed in terms of the working muscle. So that's where heart rate comes into play, is how fast the oxygen is getting to a working muscle.
Okay. So this I'm going to ask you some questions because these are questions that people ask me and
These are going to be tough
it's
ones.
gonna be tough. Okay, so I got two athletes.
Okay.
They're very similar athletes. Both top 10 athletes out of 70.3, like that kind of that level. Similar age, similar history. How come one would have a heart rate maybe 10 or 15 beats higher than the other person doing the exact same workload?
Love the question, and this is where individuals become really important. I'm sure everyone's heard, how do you predict your max heart rate's 220 minus your age or some other type of formula behind that. What's interesting is if we look at all of us and we measure our heart rate, we measure it, and then we use that equation, 220 minus your age, we will actually only be as accurate as plus or minus 15 beats on either side of that. And so if I'm 62, then what's my 220 minus 62? I'll get a number. It's either my real heart rate, max heart rate, will either be 15 beats higher or 15 beats lower than that. And it's like, what good is that? And that's the issue with big population studies. It gets you close to what you want, but individuals can be all over that window. And so why does someone have, for the same intensity, the same, even race performance, have very different heart rates? Well, one of the issues is the structure of the heart. And some people are just built with bigger hearts that beat slower, and some have smaller hearts and they beat faster. That equation I mentioned, the Fick equation, is actually rate of oxygen consumption equals heart rate times some other things, and those other things are all about the heart structure. How much blood is pumped with each beat, how fast the heart beats are critical. And we're built with different hearts. And so structurally, we can have different heart rates. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if someone has a faster heartbeat or a lower heartbeat. It does not matter. What matters is your aerobic engine and the ability of that heart rate to predict VO2.
Yeah, I love this because there are people that I've talked to and worked around and worked with that will just say, "Well, your heart rate's lower, so you're fitter," and that may be true.
Mm-hmm.
It also very easily may not be true.
Mm-hmm.
You come across this as well?
Oh yeah, yeah, and especially in different conversations. And resting heart rate will go down as we become more fitter, and as we get more fitter, how fast our heart beats may actually decrease for a given intensity because we're getting more coordinated with our movements. We're getting more effective with our movements, and so we don't need as much rate of oxygen consumption, and therefore the heart rate's gone down. Heart rate can also go down because the heart gets better at pumping blood with each beat. So there's a lot of things that go into that.
Yeah. I just think it's really interesting that, we use this proxy, but it's really an individual proxy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I can tell personally I'm getting fitter
Yeah.
in general, if I'm running at this pace and it's flat and I'm at the same altitude and temperature's the same and everything else is the
Yeah.
same and my heart rate's lower for that intensity.
Yeah.
Like I can tell that within myself or within
Mm-hmm.
even when I'm coaching. I can see the trends over time as their fitness increases, the heart rate load at that
Yeah.
intensity tends to decrease.
Mm-hmm.
But the hard thing, honestly, for me and for coaching people and for myself is there is some weird stuff that ends up happening where you think that you're trending in the right direction, and all of a sudden something happens and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work. It's not working anymore. And I don't know how much you've explored these like idiosyncratic training phenomenon that go along with heart rate, but
No, not so much.
there's some really cool or interesting ones. So, first off, the one that I always go to first when an athlete brings this to my attention, especially when their heart rate is high for a given workload, is maybe you have a subclinical infection going on,
Mm.
right? That's especially if it's going on for a few days.
Yeah.
Um, Number two, and once again, if everything else is equal, you're dehydrated.
Mm.
Number three, how's your sleep been? Right? So there's these things, their stress level in their life.
Mm-hmm.
If they've been having a high level of stress and the cortisol response is up and epinephrine responses are up. So there's all these little things that can basically mask what it looks like. But then I always tell them, don't worry about it
Yeah.
because you're still just getting oxygen around. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really matter for short amounts of time if there's something that moves that temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
Has this happened to you, or you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like I'm doing 180 watts on the bike. My heart rate should not be this high. Because like
Oh yeah, no, no,
2 days ago, it wasn't.
yeah, no, totally. And all the factors you talked about are spot on. And this is the complexity
Yeah.
of heart rate VO2 relation because we're trying to understand VO2. That's why we're measuring heart rate. But that equation is heart rate times stroke volume times how much oxygen is extracted from the blood as it passes through the system,
I,
and how much blood is pumped with the heart from the heart with each beat. And so you've got four things on this side of the equation. You got one thing that you're trying to predict. And so if heart rate changes, that doesn't mean VO2 has changed. It means one of these other things could have changed. Stroke volume gets smaller. You're starting to just beat the heart faster, but you're not extracting and ejecting as much blood. Or it could mean that your VO2 is changing, and then heart rate's just keeping up with that. But this is the complexity of really understanding heart rate. But I really like the advice you're giving is, hey, take a step back. Change in heart rate is not as big of a deal. It's really we're trying to understand VO2, but there may be some other underlying issues. And I think that's really smart to be able to be thinking about that.
yeah, and I look at it as like longer term trends, right? Because you can have a lot of variability day to day in your heart rate.
Yeah.
And it's understanding that and not freaking out about it. Like there's things that we don't even understand, like
Mm-hmm.
why this could be happening. And but I'll tell you, I've had some athletes that I've been working with, and they see that happen, and that, oh my gosh, I'm losing my fitness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I have got to talk them down off the ledge. No, you're not losing your fitness.
Right.
You're trending in the right way. It's not like you took 3 weeks off. You know, that's not happening. And we off air, we were talking about Garmin in a positive way. So I got my Garmin watch on. My Garmin watch predicts or tells me what my VO2 max is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I looked into it, something called First Beat Technologies. They bought this company called First Beat, this German company that was basically doing some pretty high level research on this.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an athlete, this happened about a month and a half ago, where their VO2, on their watch was at 60, which is pretty good milliliters,
Sure.
pretty good, right? And within a week and a half, it went to 52.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And they were freaking out. Oh my gosh, my VO2 went from 60 to 52.
Mm-hmm.
And then their race prediction,
Mm-hmm.
it goes off of that, right? My race prediction time just went for a 10K, it went from like 41 to 44.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. I'm losing all my fitness.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And so I was like, take a step back. You're fine. We're good. I swear to you, 2 weeks later, it was back up to 60.
Yeah. 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 So just,
On some individual workouts, though, their heart rate was elevated,
yeah.
right? And that because has to be one of the main drivers of
Mm-hmm.
how they're getting their. I mean, they're doing an equation. I don't know which equation they're
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
using, but something was underlying happening.
Mm-hmm.
It was getting hotter out, so
Yeah.
that was something that was happening. They'd changed altitude a little bit, so they'd spent some time in California, then they were back here. So
Mm-hmm.
that can play a role. But I think maybe there was just some kind of underlying physiologic stressor going on,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think we need to be really, really careful around these watches that are making these predictions because this watch cannot measure my VO2
Mm-hmm.
because it cannot possibly measure how much oxygen I'm utilizing,
Yeah.
right? And so having an understanding of how heart rate is being implicated into these things without context, right? Because it doesn't say, well, how was your hydration status? How have you been feeling? How have you been sleeping? Well, maybe it does the sleeping,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that that's an important takeaway.
Yeah. Treat the person, not the instrument. And, I'm reminded of a story when I worked at cardiac rehab and I was monitoring patients' EKG during exercise. And one of the one of the monitors was just going crazy. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I got to hit the panic button. And I got the patient behind me. Okay. Makes no sense. But I'm not even looking at the patient. I'm looking at the EKG. And I call the nurse over And he comes over and he looks at it. He looks over at the person. He goes, "Let's go talk to him." And we went over and just talked to him. And he's doing fine. He's exercising and oh yeah, blah blah. Well, one of the leads had fallen off or become loose. And so we fixed it. We go back over. EKG's fine. And I was all panicky. And Richard said, "John, treat the patient, not the instrument." And I think the story you're telling is true. It's the instrument's doing what the instrument does, but we don't know all the algorithms that the companies are using in these different instruments to give you whatever number it is that's on the screen. And so, really understanding the subjective feeling of a person is something that can get lost in all these instruments, and it's really important to know how the person's feeling.
Granted, during that time, the heart rate was elevated.
Hmm.
Like it was higher than I thought it should be based off of the training and the load and everything.
Yeah,
But once again, I didn't panic. They did.
yeah. Hmm.
And I said, just give it some time and we'll see, And when your heart rate does get elevated, let's say it's 10 beats a minute, 10 beats higher per minute than normal, your respiratory rate's going to also increase and your perceived exertion is probably
That's
going
right.
to,
That's right.
you're going to feel like you're working a little bit harder because you are.
Hmm.
But then I was like, let's go subjectively. How do you feel like you're running? How do you feel how do you feel on the bike? Like you feel like
Hmm.
you're strong and you're good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like, well, then that's what matters.
Yeah.
Um, I I would like to do it more, and I probably should, is like have athletes just go old school and not collect heart rate, not collect
Hmm.
power. Just you can have your Garmin like telling you how far you've went and your distance or your time maybe, but
Yeah.
just let's see how you feel.
No, and it's interesting. Rating of perceived exertion, which is something we use in our research studies, this actually ends up being a really good perception of intensity, and that correlates really well with VO2 as well. And so, that subjectiveness, even though it's hard, it's not a measurement. It's subjective, it's qualitative, but at the end of the day, how you feel ends up being really important. And in terms of heart rate during exercise, it does matter in terms of what type of device you are using.
Mhm.
Wrist-based by itself, iffy, and especially with running, chest strap is better. But I've had plenty of heart rate monitors where my heart rate is sort of blah blah blah, blah and then jumps up like 20 beats and then it's just up here. And it's because something happened to the instrument. It wasn't, static or something, just isn't sitting right with it. And I see that a lot in technology that we're using in the field. So it's hard.
And it's really, I think it's even, it's pretty hard in the endurance world right now because so many people are focused on heart rate, especially
Hmm.
especially runners, in zone two running and zone two this and zone two that, and I do a lot of zone two stuff as well. But I think we need to like once again put it into some context. Does it feel easy, right?
Hmm.
Does it feel easy? Then it's easy,
Yeah.
right? And it's so hard for people to get away from just focusing on the number, especially on especially on a bike. I don't know, can make because the computer tends to be right in front of you and you keep looking at it. And I'm like, just it feels easy, it's easy, you know.
And
Don't-
sometimes the numbers are the numbers. And I think good gauge. And I used to do this where when I'm racing, I'd go back and look at the data afterwards.
Yeah.
And then I'd look at how my heart rate was for running different paces for the run segment of a triathlon, for example. And I was able to say, oh, you know what? If I'm running really well in a sprint event, my heart rate tends to be right around here. When I'm doing a 70.3, it tends to be around here. When I'm doing a iron distance event, it tends to be around here. And so now I'm racing. I'm like, I'm slacking off. Okay, I got to get going. But having that history of subjectiveness combined with data ends up being a real powerful tool.
yeah. And I think the more you race, the more powerful it becomes,
Hmm.
because you have that history of what it feels like. And you know what, John, I'm gonna race on Sunday. And I think I might do this exact thing. I might just put the timer on, or maybe
Hmm.
just distance. Just that's the only thing on my screen for my
Yeah,
bike.
yeah.
and just see how it is and look at it afterwards. And
Hmm. Hmm.
I got to be honest with you, sometimes I get a real negative thought through my head, right? I'm not going hard enough,
Yep.
or I'm doing really well. Oh, I'm going too hard. I can't possibly hold this.
Hmm.
And yeah, maybe this, we're doing a training race.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good time to like actually look at this and
Hmm.
just see how it feels. It's a really interesting thing. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but so when I'm now prescribing for most people on a 70.3 bike course, I'm actually telling them not to use power, not to use heart rate. It's
Hmm.
only feel.
Hmm.
And I tell them, I said, if your legs are hurting more than like a 2 out of 10, you're going too hard.
Yeah.
And just leave it at that. And
Hmm. Hmm.
power is what the power is. The
Yeah.
heart rate is what the heart rate is, because the most important thing is your legs need to be fresh enough to run 13.1 miles.
Yeah. That's right.
And if you overbike because your prescription was a little bit off,
Hmm.
or if you underbike a minute, well, that still might be, you might make that up on the run.
Yeah.
If you overbike by a minute, you might cost you 3 or 4 minutes on the run.
Hmm. Yeah. Or do
And so, yeah, I've been really pushing that lately. And it's actually really interesting to see, once again, post-race analysis
hmm.
as a coach, looking at,
Yeah.
wow, you did that amount of power.
Hmm.
I didn't think you had it in you. And then
Yeah.
you had a good run. Okay, like I would have prescribed less.
Hmm.
Or on the other hand, okay, that's the amount of power you did. How was the run
Hmm.
off of that? Like, and we're constantly learning that. And yeah, and once again, that's heart rate and power.
Yeah. It's funny. We do all this sports science stuff. We do all these measurements, but I've always held on to this idea that race day is where the magic happens.
Yeah.
And magic is unexplained. It's like we don't, well, magicians can explain their tricks to each other, but in essence, it's unexplainable. And sometimes I do agree with you 100% that sometimes we're using devices that end up holding us back
Yep.
as opposed to let the magic happen. And then I love looking at the data after a race. That's where you can really sort of, well, maybe trailer your training program a little differently or adjust here or there, or maybe spend a little more time over on this type of element of the race or what have you. But yeah, I'm all about letting the magic happen on a race day.
It's so funny too, because every now and then, especially when I'm doing a running race, I look at my watch and I see my heart rate. And it's so weird. I'm like, oh, it's 160. Oh, okay. Like that's right at my threshold. Perfect.
Yeah.
I know I'm at my threshold.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah. Right.
it doesn't, if my watch said 165, I'd be like, oh yeah, it's probably about my
You don't
threshold.
need a watch to tell you that. No.
I don't need a watch to tell me if I go harder, I'm not going to go much longer. I can tell you that, right? Like maybe, but
Yeah.
maybe don't also that's because I've raced a lot
Yeah.
and I've learned what happens when I
Yeah.
go too hard.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I'm with you too. Like sometimes you just gotta let it happen.
Well, and there's a risk of failure.
For sure.
And you say, well, okay, let the magic happen, and then all of a sudden you're running 7 minute miles for your first miles in the iron distance of that, and I've done that, and I've crashed and burned,
And
but
I've done it before. Same thing, right? Like and
yeah,
I'm with you. Like if I would have actually been looking at my numbers, I probably wouldn't have went so hard.
right.
Right.
But that's part of the fun too, is letting take the handcuffs off and seeing what happens. So I do attest to that approach. But
Yeah, like how do you know what your limit is? Right?
hmm.
Like in a 70.3,
Yeah.
how do you really know?
Mm-mm. Yeah. Well, when you don't finish.
Or or you weren't planning on walking and you're walking,
Yeah.
right? But how do you know it was the swim that didn't cause that? Or how do you
Right.
know
Hmm.
there's so many other factors.
Hmm.
Was it purely a nutrition issue? It wasn't a pace issue.
Hmm.
There's so many things and I've done this once again with the athletes I've worked with. I'm like, let's take a risk today.
Yeah.
Let's ride harder than we normally have.
Hmm.
And if you fail, it's okay, right?
Hmm.
This is not the A race of the year. We're here to learn something about ourselves. And if at mile 10 you're walking, okay, we went too hard,
Hmm.
right? Now, I would never do this with a first timer. You know what I mean? Like, but this
Right.
is a seasoned athlete that has
Hmm.
maybe never really felt what it feels
No,
like to
explore it. Hmm.
explore it
Yeah,
and maybe find the magic, right?
yeah,
And find that actually I actually have been holding myself back because a lot of us, I think, hold ourselves back for the fear of, well, what if I don't finish?
that's
And
right.
we've
Yeah.
had podcasts on not finishing.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think DNFs are actually help mature an athlete. I know that sounds odd because you did not finish, and that's a failure in many eyes, but it also, you can learn a lot. I had some of my best races after DNFing a race before that because I learned something. And, you then apply that to the next event or next series of events or whatever. And so, yeah, I think you're right that a lot of people are afraid of getting a DNF, but I really believe DNFs are a way to mature as an athlete.
Yep. And I'll also tell you that DNF rarely is because of your heart rate.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
My heart rate was too high, so I didn't finish. I don't think that's a
No, that's true. Yeah,
maybe having your heart rate too high for too long is a proxy for you
yeah,
going too hard, but it
yeah,
wasn't the heart
yeah.
rate that caused you not to finish. Your heart
Well,
would have been fine to keep going.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's true.
All right,
Excellent.
John. Hey, this was a good talk. Thank you so much for your time
Yeah, thank you.
and the physiology in the beginning. That was good. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you at the race on Sunday.
All right, sounds good. Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
bye.